Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, June 19th, 2015. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. We've already got callers queuing up. The lines are loading up here. Quick program note, the lovely Lady Claire will be in with us on the third hour, giving us her unique point of view on what's going on in the world today. But getting into the news here, we are still seeing a backlash from all the overt propaganda that is coming out in the wake of the Charleston shooting. And a lot of gun rights groups are taking exception to Obama's comments about it's time for gun control because this type of mass violence does not happen in other advanced countries. Well, there's a couple of things to look at. First of all, in those other countries, you don't have the mass medication with prescription psychiatric drugs that are advertised on TV that you have here in the United States of America. And the reality is, mass murders do happen in other countries. There was Bering Breivik in Norway, killed 75 people. Mohamed Merah killed 7 in France. Genildo Ferreira de Franca killed 14 in Brazil. And the list goes on and on and on. Mass murder is not confined to the United States of America. Now, Obama is out there talking tough on gun control, and yet his immigration policy allowed 121 known murderers to be let loose in the United States of America. So it's kind of a hypocrisy there. And we're seeing them pile on the agenda all over the place. Over at Rude Pundit, and I was very disappointed because Rude Pundit normally has more common sense, but they're out there with this article, of course it's the guns, it's always the guns. You know, guns amplify the racism and foster hatred and give an easy outlet to the mentally ill. Well, easy outlet for the mentally ill, yeah, that's the problem. Because these psychiatric medications don't cure these people, they make them worse. But guns don't amplify the racism. Guns don't foster hatred. They are simply inanimate objects. Actually, right now, it's the media that's trying to fan up the racism and the hatred as a political tool. And Rude Pundit's out there basically trying to ridicule people who cling to the belief that only guns can stop guns. And he ends with a statement, easy access to guns means more murder. That is complete nonsense. The fact is that 1.6 million crimes are stopped every year in this country by Americans with legally owned firearms. I know because when I still lived in Los Angeles, I halted a burglary of my home with a firearm. But the media doesn't report citizens who stop crime because blood and bodies make for better ratings. And the police are not interested in citizens able to protect themselves because then it underscores how useless the police actually are for anything other than writing tickets and stealing cash from innocent Americans when they're not beating them up or tasing them or shooting their dogs. Because again, look at this Charleston church shooting. The police were not able to prevent it, were they? Those people in that church died in part because they believed the police could protect them. But the police do not intervene in violent crime. There have been court cases which actually say, no, the police are not obligated to save you from violent crime. There was a very telling case happened in Georgetown some years ago involving 3 women who were sharing a townhouse. And some guys broke in and started raping one of the girls. The other 2 called the police, and the police said, yeah, we'll be there. And things quieted down, and the 2 girls thought maybe the cops had showed up. They walked down. They got taken prisoner, and they had an entire night of, well, they probably could have made a porn movie out of it. And the women sued the District of Columbia Police for failing to do their job, and the court said, no, they're not actually obligated to do that. Now, the hardcore statistics are, when law-abiding citizens are disarmed, crime does go up. Have you ever wondered why the shootout at the OK Corral is so famous? Because it was a rare event. That's what made it noteworthy. In the West, everyone wore guns, and for the most part lived far safer lives than citizens of the eastern industrialized cities of the same era. The popular image of the Wild West, fostered by the dime novels, was actually bought and paid for propaganda by the owners of factories, desperate to keep their workers from leaving the factory and seeking better lives out west. Oh, yes, you have to go on working for us 18 hours a day for no wages here, because if you go out west, the bad guys will shoot you, and really you want to be safe here as my economic slave here. Now, the media, of course, is continuing to turn an absolute blind eye to the fact that this Dylan Roof, like all the other mass shooters being wagged at us by the gun grabbers, was on some serious psychiatric medications. It's confirmed he was on multiple prescriptions. 2 of the drugs have been identified, Xanax and Suboxone, both of which have documented histories of triggering violent and erratic behavior. But corporate media doesn't want to lose those big, fat pharmaceutical advertising contracts. And remember, America is one of only 3 nations that allows TV advertising of prescription medications. And members of Congress don't want to lose those big donations from pharmaceutical corporations. Congress actually held hearings into the link between SSRIs and violence, but declined to do anything because they didn't want to offend those people with the big checkbooks. Even Rudy Giuliani is out there saying gun control does not prevent crime. Even author Stephen King was out there screaming about, you've got to wake up and realize that we have to ban all guns if we're ever going to be safe. And I want to make a point here. And this is a talking point you should all remember and share with anybody when you discuss this subject. Drunk drivers kill far more people than guns do. And when a drunk driver kills somebody, the government doesn't start screaming that they have to take cars away from all the law-abiding drivers, do they? They punish the bad behavior of the drunk driver, who is under the influence of a drug. And the same thing applies here. Dylan Roof was on drugs, prescribed orthodox psychiatric drugs that are known to cause these problems. Let's deal with the real cause and not try and get out there and say that law-abiding citizens should give up their guns because of the actions of a few crazies with their brains melted on these chemicals. All right, I better start taking phone calls here because the lines are really loading up here. We're going to go to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, if Stephen King bans all the guns, how are we going to fight the spiders in the mist?
You know what's amazing here is how much money he's made on his books and movies about extreme violence and guns and the rest of it, and then he turns around and says, guns are bad.
Yeah, I can't shoot that hamburger menu machine, huh?
Well, I mean, in his book Needful Things, guns played a major role. Satan was giving out guns to all these people, and it was a bad thing. But I mean, he's being a hypocrite. I mean, he himself was the victim of a car accident. Is he going to be out there and say that everybody ought to give up their cars? I don't think so.
Hey, Mike, I want to talk about St. Petersburg and Russia, but real quick, the Dylan guy, I mean, you see his eyes, and you look at the Batman shooting, and look at his eyes, and they're all on SSRIs.
They're all doped up. They're all absolutely doped up, and that's the big...
Yeah, I don't see Obama. Obama didn't say anything about the pharmaceutical companies, just,
no. The guns are bad. We've got to take the guns away. The guns are bad. The drugs are good. The guns are bad. Starting to sound like Zardoz, actually, here. All right,
okay.
Yeah, Dustin, we're going to have to take a break for commercials. Do not hang up. I'm going to come right back to you after we finish these words from our sponsors. We've got a whole bunch of calls. We're going to try and get to all of you in the next segment. So thank you for being patient and staying on there. And by the way, if you don't know what I'm talking about, Zardoz was this amazing movie. It was Sean Connery's first movie after he quit being James Bond. And if you've never seen it, you have to. It is just amazing. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Before we go back to the phones, I want to make another point here. Every year in the United States of America, 400,000 Americans are killed by medical mistakes. And we know that there have been cases where doctors and nurses have been arrested and sent to prison for just deciding they're going to go ahead and kill people they don't think ought to be living, the so-called angel of death syndrome. Is this a justification to ban all doctors? Maybe that's not entirely a bad idea, but you understand where I'm going with this. For every other bad activity, I mean, laws are supposed to punish behavior, not possessions. We don't take cars away from all drivers because of the drunk drivers. We don't ban all doctors because of those doctors and nurses who killed their patients, do we? We shouldn't apply that to guns either. The agenda here is not public safety. It is a government that is terrified of you. And we know what's going to happen with all this gun-grabbing rhetoric. Gun sales are going to go right through the roof again. It's a shame that Colt had to declare bankruptcy because they would be into profits right now. All right, we're going to go back and complete our call with Dustin in New Jersey. You had something else you wanted to mention.
Yeah, and I watched the speech with Putin. Well, I watched the conference with St. Petersburg, and remember we were talking about yesterday about how everything's shifting east, and they know this. And Greece needs to move east as quick as possible because, I mean, there's already lines forming in Athens for bank runs. Yeah, we're going to be talking about that as soon as, we're through the wars and everything. But they're talking about the banks in Greece are not even going to be able to open on Monday. It's going to start coming apart next week. Over there, Mike. Yeah, of course there's going to be violence. It's horrible. And I blame the IMF, the United States, UK, for this whole, and Wall Street, for this whole predicament they put the planet in. It all goes back to the private central banks issuing all the public currency as a loan at interest, a system which by design produces more debt than money with which to pay that debt until the debt drives the people into absolute poverty, makes the bankers rich, and brings the society to the edge of collapse, which is what's happening right now. The difference between now and historical events of this nature is that globalism has linked all these central banks together so that the whole system is going to come down all at the same time, and it's going to be ugly. And we, the people of planet Earth, billions strong, are going to have to say, as we rebuild our civilization, no more private central banks. The public currency has to be treated as a public utility, not a privatized for-profit scam to make the owners of these banks, these ink and paper factories, insanely rich on the labor of everybody else around them. And, Mike, I just want to say this pipeline that's going through Turkey to Greece, this pipeline needs to be put into action quick. I mean, the United States is going to do everything, and UK is going to do everything, and Belgium is going to do everything possible to keep this from happening. Oh, they might even bomb it. If we get into a conflict with Russia, I would not be surprised if the pipeline was bombed. Well, the Saudi oil fields would be bombed then. They'd be the first to go. Nobody's going to bomb the oil fields, but they'll definitely bomb the refineries and the pipeline. They'll claim it's terrorism, but that's how they control who's making money off of other people's oil. All right, Dustin, I got to let you go. We have got a huge number of phone calls waiting. We're going to go to Andrew in New York. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. I think the European Union is going to fall down like the Soviet Union did.
I think so. I think the European Union is going to collapse. There is no way that the financial fallout from Greece is not going to hit Wall Street. And, of course, Wall Street's going to say, well, they're already writing editorials. We need more taxpayer bailouts. And we, the American people, have to be ready to stand up united and say, no, we are not your wallet of last resort. You made this mess. You deal with it yourself. We didn't give you our permission to do what you did. You violated the Constitution. You sold out to the money junkies. This is your problem. We're not involved. This is why they're trying to get a race war going as hard as they can, so that we're so busy sneering at people of different colors that we forget who really is the cause of all the misery, hunger, starvation, and poverty in this country.
What do you think about Jesse Ventura running as a third-party candidate? I think he's going to run as an independent.
Well, he did a good job as governor. In fact, if he's going to run right now, he would be my number one candidate for next year.
I think he has a petition online to sign because he's running as a different party and he needs people to sign
Email that to me. I'll put it up on whatreallyhappened.com, because if he's really running, he just became my number one candidate, because I like Bernie Sanders, but he's gone into this whole human cause global warming carbon tax thing. So just email that to me, and thank you very much here. We're going to grab one more call before the commercial break. Keith in Montana, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I just want to make two brief statements here, then I'll listen to you offline, okay? First of all, what when you hear all the ads, whether they're on GCN or whatever like that, the full prisons in America and stuff, the crime in America, it's all crimes of Americans against Americans. And the other fact is this gun issue. It seems like Americans have no problem with Obama sending guns, thousands of guns to Mexico, God knows how many to Iraq, Libya, Syria, which have killed hundreds of thousands of people. What Americans need to get rid of is American exceptionalism, and realize that we're not the top of the totem pole and stuff. They'll use guns wherever they want around the world, killing God knows how many millions. And then when a crime happens here in the United States, it's, oh my God, you know.
Yeah,
anyway,
it
that
is.
was my comment for you. Okay.
Well, you're absolutely right there. I mean, right, the United States is the largest supplier of small arms to the rest of the world. They're making huge amounts of money on that, and the hypocrisy is just absolutely stunning. You are right. The U.S. government spent your tax dollars to send to Mexican drug criminals the very same kind of military-style weapons they're now insisting you do not have a right to, which flies in the face of the United States Supreme Court decision, United States versus Miller, where the Supreme Court said the Second Amendment reserves to the American people the same weapons carried by the uniformed military.
Yeah, Mike?
Yeah.
Yeah, one other comment here. If you read the Lugar-Obama Act, it clearly states in there what is defined as the premise for preemptive attacks on other nations. And that's whether it's man pads or whatever like that, you know. But the point is, though, is both Bush and George Bush, who signed that law into office there in 2008 before Obama came in, and then Obama himself, who's directly violated that in arming all these alleged moderate rebels and stuff. But again, as you just mentioned, these are all done with U.S. tax dollars that have killed millions of people around the world. And it's all for the banking cartel like that, you know. Well,
the banks loan the money for the war. The manufacturing companies that make the weapons, they make money, paying for the war, or rather selling the weapons for the war. And we're all expected to just pay for it all and then clean up the mess when it's all over. And it really is, this is another classic case of all wars are bankers' wars. Keith, I got to let you go. We got to take another break for commercials. We will be right back with John from Barbados. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before I go back to the phones here, I want to get through some more of these headlines related to the Charleston church shooting. As you're aware, Dylan Roof has had his day in court, $1 million bond. They're charging him with murder, asking for the death penalty. Well, yeah, gee, you think. There's no gray area in this one, okay? Now, I'm not the only person who thinks there is something very suspicious about this. The corporate media earlier today was reporting that Dylan had been planning this attack for 6 months, meaning going back before his Facebook page was created, which, by the way, has now been deleted. And I'm looking at this article over here in Natural News, no less, that this church shooting has every sign of a deliberate plot to ignite a race war across America. And Fox News is reporting that Dylan Roof supposedly said, we don't know because we didn't hear him directly, but it's being claimed Dylan Roof said he wanted to do this shooting to start a race war. It's sort of the 2015 version of Charles Manson's Helter Skelter, for those of you who are my age. Lindsey Graham, though, is out following another agenda, saying that Dylan Roof may have been looking to kill Christians. And I'm sure that Lindsey is going to discover evidence that Dylan is actually secretly a Muslim to push that particular agenda. All righty, let's see. Now, again, one more time, we're seeing these articles pop up, and it's a good thing. Over at Patriot Rising, every mass shooting shares one thing in common, and it is not guns. And they're talking about how all these extreme cases of mass violence are linked to these prescription psychiatric drugs. And it gets back to that parallel I have with drunk driving. It is illegal to drive drunk, and yet people will do it. And they get into accidents and they kill people under the influence of a drug. And nobody says, let's take all the cars away from the law-abiding drivers. So we have somebody like a Dylan Roof, who is on prescription given by his doctor, psychiatric drugs with a long history of triggering episodes of extreme violence. And he goes and shoots some people, and the government says, oh, well, we have to take guns away from all the law-abiding citizens. And it's that double standard that underscores the real agenda is to disarm the American people so that we lose our right and our ability to say no to abusive government, which is why that Second Amendment was in there in the first place. It's not about target shooting. It's not about hunting. It's about keeping an uppity government in check. That's what it's about. All righty, let's grab a phone call here. John in Barbados, thank you for waiting. What's on your mind today?
Well, returning back to this shooting, to me it looks like this full court press is a distraction away from all the other problems, the imminent collapse of the Western banking system, the imminent war, or looks like a war with Russia. And
they're definitely using this shooting to conditize us all, and a lot of people have observed that. The media is just totally obsessed about this right now. That's all they're reporting, practically.
Well, anyway, let me go through a little scenario. In Britain, they banned all handguns. And what happened? The criminals still have the handguns, but the occasional, opportunist criminal, he uses a knife. And a knife is a silent killer.
Yes.
And it's not just knives, it's hammers, claw hammers, hatchets that they use for chopping kindling, anything. So
I heard that more Britons were being crippled by beer mugs slammed into their face than by guns before the gun ban.
Absolutely. Glass. They call it glassing. And it literally rams a beer glass into your face, and these mugs are quite tough. It will do some serious damage. So, banning guns isn't the solution. Not at all, because the criminals are still armed, and as I say, the occasional hooligan will use a knife or some similar instrument. But anyway, I wanted to just cover this thing from London that Zippy Livni has been given diplomatic immunity. So I sent a quick email, and I just said to her, you realize that diplomatic immunity doesn't make you bulletproof. Bearing in mind that we've been warned about all the ISIS, al-Nusra, al-Qaeda fighters returning to the UK from Syria.
Well, Tsippi wasn't really concerned about that. She just didn't want to be arrested. And it is a serious misuse of the idea of diplomatic immunity, because diplomatic immunity originally meant when you were in another country, you were immune from arrest and prosecution for certain crimes that you might commit there without knowing the local laws. But there are limits on what diplomatic immunity can do, and certainly being arrested for war crimes is off that list. If you go into another country and you're dealing drugs or committing felony fraud, you can still be arrested and prosecuted, and you should be.
Well, I understand that Dick Cheney and George Bush are very reluctant to travel outside the U.S. now.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of people like that. There are, I think, something like 12 or 13 nations Henry Kissinger can never set foot in.
These things are creating quite a kerfuffle, but it's all being covered up by the media, like the Jimmy Savile affair and all his...
Oh, yeah. It is. When you're rich, powerful, and popular, you can just get away with these things. John, I'm going to let you go because I would very much like to get one more call in before the next commercial break. DJ in Georgia, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind? DJ, are you there? Going once.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for taking the call. There was an article in Russian press. Vladimir Markin, I guess he's a Russian investigative committee member or head, and they wanted to open up an investigation into what happened with the Apollo 11, original footage and all the moon rocks that NASA claimed that they got. And I just wanted to, get your take on it, and also the fact that no other country, including China and India, ever made it to the moon. They claimed that the Van Allen radiation belt would have been.
Okay, well, first of all, let me back you up a little bit. This Russian article doesn't challenge that the Apollo moon landings actually happened. And by the way, China's getting ready to send a manned mission to the moon right now. What the article was all about is that some of the archival materials did go missing. And it was a big stink because if you all remember the very grainy view that we had of Armstrong stepping onto the moon, there was actually a high-resolution copy of that was made down in the Parkes tracking station that was carrying that feed. That got sent to NASA. It got destroyed by accident. Huge embarrassment. Parkes had a second copy of the tapes. They sent them to Houston. They got mislaid. As far as the moon rocks, a big hole in where they went is that Richard Nixon made gifts of moon rocks to foreign heads of states. Quite a few of the rocks from the Apollo 11 were mounted on plaques and in glass. Some went to museums, and a lot of them were given as gifts to the leaders of all the other nations on Earth with the understanding that they would be put in the museums after that leader stepped down. Turns out most of the leaders just decided to keep them. Plus, there was actually a theft of some of the moon rocks. Somebody actually got into Houston and got the file cabinet. They did recover the rocks, but once they were out of the lab and contaminated, they were kind of useless for any kind of research. So it's an interesting little footnote to history, and things, unfortunately, do get lost in large organizations. We have to take a break. We'll be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, over in Israel, I think they have finally downloaded the clue that they are losing the public relations battle with the rest of the world. And they're starting to take draconian actions, which are only going to work against them in the long run. Netanyahu is, who's also the acting communications minister of Israel, has ordered the shutdown of the Palestine 48 TV channel operating in Nazareth and funded by the Palestinian Authority, declaring it to be propaganda and counterproductive, and we need to shut it down. This from the same group of people who is still out there claiming that intentionally offensive cartoons about Muhammad and Jesus represent freedom of speech. And in the end, it's going to be all these double standards and hypocrisies that destroy their credibility. Because people all over the world have an inherent sense of fairness. There's one set of rules for everybody. You don't get to sit up there and say that what we say is protected speech and what you say is hate speech and to be banned. That's the hallmark of tyranny and dictatorship, and everybody knows it. Meanwhile, there was a big stink where one of the Israeli leaders was basically turning on U.S. Jewish journalists Friedman, Weiseltier, Remnick, and Silvers, and basically came out and said, look, you Jewish people are in majority control of the American media. Big surprise there. But he then turns around and accused them of disloyalty and anti-Semitism because they've actually dared criticize Israel. And the wheels are really coming off the cart. When you are out there shouting insults at what remains of your loyal supporters, they are not going to remain loyal much longer. And we have seen a growing trend here in the United States of America where American Jews are starting to pull back from this whole Israel thing because they're recognizing that it's Israel's actions that make the world more dangerous for Jewish people everywhere. The actions of Israel's government is a threat to the world's Jewish people because the Israeli government is still continuing to try and blur that line between the actions of themselves as a government and all the world's Jewish people. Israel's government likes to shield its crimes behind the facade of the world's Jewish people, and they're setting them up as targets is what they're doing. And more Jewish people are beginning to realize that, and they're starting to pull back and cool on some of this stuff here. Israel is threatening direct military intervention in Syria's civil war. They're talking about invading Syria and grabbing a huge chunk of land for a safety buffer for those poor, suffering Druze minority people here. And yeah, we believe Israel's concerned about the Druze after we have seen how they treated the Palestinians, right? This is just another excuse for Israel to grab more of other people's lands for Eretz Israel, the Israel described in the Bible from the Nile to the Euphrates. Now, the State Department has come out with a new report claiming that Iran's support for international terrorism is ramping up. You heard it on the SRN news break as well. Now, I found an online copy of the article over at the New York Times, no less. The headline, Iran still supports terrorism. But if you actually read into the article after the headline, you find out what they're talking about is Iran's support for Syria's President Assad. That's what they're calling terrorism. This is just another Iran bad, Iran bad. You will hate Iran. You will love Obama. You will love Israel. You will hate Iran. Now, I'm concerned about this announcement coming as it does on the heels of Israel's testing of radioactive dirty bombs in the Negev, because we know at this point they're getting desperate enough to try another false flag. And I want to point out something very interesting. This article in the New York Times is calling Iran's support for Syria's government as terrorism, while they describe U.S. support for the hired mercenaries trying to bring down Syria's government as nation building, or we're bringing them democracy. And again, in the long run, in the end, hypocrisy and double standards will be the undoing of any institution's credibility. Now, Vladimir Putin is expressing concern over the unilateral United States withdrawal from the ABM Treaty, the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. This was a treaty that was signed by all parties to try and control military spending by not getting into an anti-missile arms race. Now, one of the reasons there was such a cover-up of the accidental shoot-down of TWA 800 off of Long Island was the system being tested there was a violation of the ABM treaty terms. But now the U.S. has just pulled out of it, and Putin is saying, yeah, you just opened the door to a new arms race, at which point all of the U.S. defense contractors started popping the champagne corks and having orgasms. And I want to point out another double standard. The U.S. government is currently insisting that we, the American people, will have to comply with the provisions of these trade treaties being negotiated totally in secret. But at the same time, they simply walk away from treaties that get in the way of their war machine. It's another double standard. If treaties are inviolable, they're inviolable. If treaties can be just walked away from, then why aren't we walking away from TPP, TTIP? More double standards. Now, Saudi Arabia has supposedly sent a mission to Moscow to approach Vladimir Putin to try and get him to sort of lose interest in the Middle East and to basically bring him on board with Riyadh and the Washington, D.C. agenda, at least vis-a-vis the Middle East. I don't think they're going to get a lot of traction because Saudi Arabia has tried this before with threats that they couldn't even carry out, and absurd offers of lavish financial rewards for Putin if he'll sell out. And so they're already going into this meeting from a position of weakness, because Vladimir Putin, I think, is probably going to be very insulted that Saudi Arabia, or for that matter Israel, assume that he can be bought off as easily as his American counterpart. And he can't. So that is probably not going to work out. The U.S. Senate has approved a new defense policy bill that calls for directly arming the Ukrainian forces, the Kiev forces. More of your tax money into more weapons. In case you were wondering why the schools are falling apart, the roads are full of holes, the bridges are collapsing, and the trains don't work, because all of your tax money is going for more weapons to try and provoke a war with Russia. They are desperate right now. They know the economy is about to implode, and if they don't have a real world war to blame it on, Every American is going to point the finger of blame where it richly deserves to go. Wall Street and their complicit enablers in Washington, D.C. Now, Oliver Stone is out there in an interview saying that ordinary Ukrainians are suffering from a U.S. ideological crusade against Russia. He's absolutely correct. Because when the U.S. goes out on these overthrows of these wars, they don't care what happens to ordinary people. The United Nations is reporting 60 million people on planet Earth lost their homes last year from all these wars. And I'm a great admirer of Oliver Stone. One of my regrets for my film career is I didn't get a chance to work with him. I would have really enjoyed that. More airstrikes across Yemen, 10 civilians killed. And U.S. lawmakers are calling, once again, for a Syrian no-fly zone because Assad is using gas on his own people. You can believe us this time, even though we lied about this 12 times before. So, is Canada preparing for war? Apparently Canada is changing their immigration law, where if you will serve in the Canadian Armed Forces, there's a fast track to Canadian citizenship. Which sounds really good. Canada's a nice place to live. The people are very wonderful and polite. But Canada's making the same strategic mistake with immigrants that the U.S. is. It doesn't matter how well you train and equip these inductees. They lack the motivation to be effective fighters. They don't have the emotional connection with Canada or the U.S. And they're going to have a real rough time against foreign soldiers fighting for their homes and families within eyesight. We'll be back after the news. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Now, there was a very interesting article over in the Telegraph in Great Britain, and the headline seems banal enough. Global cost of war reaches $14 trillion, says report. Now, this is a report from the Institute for Economics and Peace, which found that the Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan were responsible for the surge in war deaths, and already I'm thinking this Institute for Economics and Peace is another one of these clandestine government propaganda fronts. For two reasons. First of all, it is the U.S. interventions in Syria, Iraq, Ukraine, Yemen, Libya, Afghanistan, etc., that are responsible for the surge in war deaths and displaced persons. And I seriously doubt the financial cost is as low as $14 trillion. So the propaganda is definitely cranking up there. All right, let's talk about the economy. And, of course, as some of the earlier callers indicated, people are concerned about a Greek bank holiday. Now, the European Central Bank had an emergency unscheduled conference today trying to figure out some way they can fix this mess without actually having to cut anybody slack on the debt. Now, the Greek banks are being emptied by people who are concerned about a coming crash. And unfortunately, the meeting they had today with the Eurogroup ended without any kind of a deal. And the ECB is warning the EU officials it's not sure if the Greek banks will actually open on Monday. Bank holiday, and that will start the panic. Now, ECB's Courrier is quoted as saying on the Greek banks, tomorrow they'll be open, meaning today, Friday. Monday, I'm not sure. So we're getting this from a lot of sources. Now, over in Greece, their prime minister is saying that part of the problem here is that the European Union sees itself as the hub of the universe, that everything is supposed to come and go through them. Well, that's going to come as a shock for the people on Wall Street who think, at least because of Bretton Woods, that Wall Street was the hub of the universe and all the money was coming and going through them. But a big part of what's going on is that so many people in positions of wealth and leadership still have the imperialist attitudes of the last century. And they're not interested in peace and cooperation. They're interested in owning it all and building gigantic temples to their own magnificence where they can stand up on top and scream, I own it all. Now, the ECB supposedly raised emergency liquidity limits for the Greek banks to try and keep cash in there, but as fast as they're pouring the cash in, the Greek people are taking it out. Now, Tsipras has met with Putin. We don't know exactly what they talked about, but one of the things that did come out is that Tsipras is saying the problem isn't confined to just Greece. It is affecting all of Europe, and he's absolutely right. Because all of the European Union nations are deeply in debt because they're enslaved to a private central bank that issues all the currency as a loan at interest. And it is a problem that is affecting the entire European Union. It just happens to be hitting Greece first and worst, in part because of that underhanded little currency swap deal that Goldman Sachs and Papandreou did some years back. But other countries are not very far behind, such as Italy, France, Spain. And again, a reminder, the Greek government's official position is that this huge debt is illegal under EU and ECB rules and regulations. It's illegitimate, and because of that deal with Goldman Sachs and Papandreou, it is odious. And that is a recognized principle in international law. Now, for odious debt to become a factor, Greece will have to leave the European Union. You can't stay connected to your former system of government and say, the debt was odious, we're not going to pay it. Odious debt comes into play when there's a change of leadership or a change of allegiance. And Russia is offering a credit line to Greece. They're rolling out the red carpet, and Greece is looking at how kind and gentle and generous Russia was with Cyprus. And it has to be looking very, very attractive right now. Now, here's another little story. This came out of Russia Today. Journalists in Greece, their version of the prostitutes and the correspondents, were apparently, how should I put this, encouraged, bribed by the International Monetary Fund to write all of their stories in the newspaper with a pro-austerity, pro-banker bias. And these journalists are going public saying it wasn't their real opinion, but the IMF was out there, flying them to these conferences in luxury resorts and just treating them really well and say, we're going to treat you like you are made out of gold as long as you're willing to lie to your own people in your own country that our system of banking and economics is the only possible way the world could be, which we know is an absolute lie. Now, as I said before, Russia is getting ready to hand Greece a credit line to bail them out. Putin has phrased it very cleverly, saying that he is working with and cooperating with the Western creditors and the European Union to find the best solution. Because we know what's going to happen. If Greece leaves the EU and Russia recapitalizes them, you're going to see all the war hawks in the United States screaming, Russia has annexed Greece, Russia invaded Greece, because they're still doing that with Crimea. They're still insisting that Russia stole Crimea, and that's not what happened at all. So Putin is playing this very, very cleverly. I got to admit, he's an amazing guy, and I've come to admire him greatly. All right, story coming out, another one from Russia Today. The anti-Russian sanctions have hit Europe harder than expected. It has threatened 2.5 million jobs, and it has cost Europe 100 billion euros in economic costs. And so over at the White House, they're probably saying, well then, we're going to do more of the same thing. We're going to prove to those Russians that we can smack our own thumbs with a hammer as long as it takes until they see things our way. Thump, 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 thump. Sweden's largest fund manager is quietly dumping stocks before the herd starts thundering, which is a term of craft from Wall Street. When the panic sets in, everybody goes. And by the way, we didn't get our traditional Friday happy ending on the American stock market, despite all the massaging. And there was a very obvious effort in the late hours of trading to try and drive it back up into the green. Didn't get there. And that's going to make people very nervous for the weekend. Meanwhile, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is saying that Russia is going to respond in kind to the seizure of its financial assets abroad. They have to take action, but they're going to go with a measured response, meaning for every Russian asset seized and frozen, they will seize foreign assets in their country. A balance, a tit for tat, as it were. And again, Russia didn't initiate or instigate any of this. This is all coming from Wall Street, the ECB, the Federal Reserve, the money junkies. This is another war for the bankers. Oh, by the way, if you're an intern at Goldman Sachs, little grounds to celebrate, your workday has been cut back to only 17 hours a day. So now look at all that free time you've got all of a sudden. You only have to work 17 hours a day to be an intern at Goldman Sachs. What will you do with all that spare time? Take up knitting maybe. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Well, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I'm going to have to pull back my endorsement for Jesse Ventura. I've been informed by one of our listeners that Jesse Ventura has drunk the Kool-Aid regarding human-caused global warming and, like all other American politicians, is somewhat reluctant to get into the issue of Israel's treatment of Palestine. So, sorry. I mean, I did like what Jesse Ventura, seriously, when he was governor, I liked what he had to say about what the proper role of government is. And, you know, he seems to have a lot of common sense. But when they start playing politics, common sense goes out the window. Now then, getting on back to the economy. The European Union is extending their trade and investment ban on Crimea. Okay? Because of Russia's aggression here. And that basically this article, which is over at Reuters, basically continues the propaganda. The measures were adopted following Russia's annexation of Ukraine's Crimea region in March of last year, and reinforces the European Union's policy of not recognizing the annexation. Okay. One more time, and this time I will go real slow for the dim-witted people hired to write for the corporate media. Russia did not annex Crimea. Following the U.S.-backed overthrow of the government of Ukraine in January of 2014, Crimea voted to secede, as they did not want to live under a U.S. puppet ruler, given the long and tragic history of what happens to other nations living under such U.S. juntas. Now, Crimea had the legal right to secede under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which grants all people the right to self-determination. Crimea then held a second election and voted to merge with Russia. Crimea made the request. Russia accepted. Now, we all know the prostitutes and correspondents of the corporate media are paid liars. Following the collapse of the Sunday Times story that Russia and China had decoded Edward Snowden's files, placing intelligence assets at risk. And the story was a fake because the files were destroyed before Snowden even went to Russia. One of the authors of that Sunday Times piece ducked the blame for deceiving his readers by admitting in a CNN interview that he just wrote what the government told him to write. So it's not like he himself did a bad thing. I'm just paid to put my name on the government propaganda. That's what I do. So I have a message to all those prostitutes and correspondents of the corporate media, and I know some of you are listening to this show. I know you are hired and paid to be mindless government stooges, but let's not abuse the policy. Interesting little story at the Daily Mail talking about the latest doomsday bunker. California entrepreneur has built a $1 billion bunker for millionaires, where survivors can live for an entire year without leaving. And it's a luxury bunker, and they had pictures and everything. They've actually got swimming pools, theaters, gyms, restaurants, customs department, helicopter service. And frankly, after the economic collapse, I think we need to find all these billionaire bunkers and just cement over the hatches. Don't go inside. Don't try and loot the place. Just find the door and cement it over, and that will be that. Now, speaking of prostitutes and correspondents, the other day we were talking about this very bizarre statement being put out by Brian Williams' defenders that he's not really a journalist or a reporter. He's just a performer, and so we shouldn't expect him to be truthful. We shouldn't hold him to that high standard of honesty and truthfulness that, in theory at least, corporate media personnel is supposed to have. And it turns out that was the first salvo in the resurrection of Brian Williams, who is now back in the graces of the corporate media. He's not going to anchor the NBC Nightly News, but he's going to anchor the breaking news over at MSNBC. And he had to take a pay cut. Poor Brian Williams, because everybody knows that he is a liar, had to take a pay cut to $8 million per year. And it's like I said just yesterday on this show. Corporate media stars get these huge salaries, not to tell you the truth, but to be convincing liars. That's what they're paid to do. That's what their owners and masters pay them to do. Sell you the new car, the new running shoe, the new cologne, the new candidate, the new war. That's what they do. You can get the truth for free. People will tell you the truth for free. But a good lie pays big bucks in the United States of America. It's the only industry we still have that's booming right now. It's public relations and propaganda. Now, up in Washington State, they're getting ready for a government shutdown the 1st of next month. And partly in response to that, there is a gun show that is getting ready to take place. Arms Expo 2015. It's going to be in Yakima between June 20th and 21st. Are refusing to comply with Washington State's background check law. They're saying it stops at the door. They're saying we will not comply with an infringement on our Second Amendment rights. Now, the other day we were talking about how the Pope has been recruited to sell these agendas to you. They can't convince you with the science. They can't convince you with the corporate media. So they're going back to the Middle Ages, where whatever they want you to do, the Pope will say it's God's will that you do what the bosses are telling you to do. And of course the Pope was out there, chastising us people who refuse to believe the human caused global warming. It turns out the Vatican is heavily financially invested in the fossil fuel industry. And they were queried about that if the Pope is really concerned about global warming, are they going to start divesting those investments? And the Vatican is saying, well, we're going to be looking at this decision for a very long time. And possibly as a distraction from that hypocrisy, the Catholic Church has performed a nationwide exorcism of the country of Mexico. Because Mexico finds itself at the mercy of demons, and the Catholic Church just did an exorcism to cast those demons out. Evil demons be gone. And boy, aren't you glad now we have open borders here along Texas? Gee, I wonder where all those demons are going. By the way, you know what happens when you don't pay your exorcist, right? You get repossessed. Now, if you are a customer of AT&T, you may have noticed, if you have an unlimited data plan, that the data was actually somewhat limited. AT&T customers complained to the FCC that past a certain amount of data, the feed would slow down. FCC investigated, hit AT&T with a $100 million fine. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And now I'm really confused because somebody just reminded me that when Jesse Ventura was doing his conspiracy theory show, he did an episode basically attacking the global warming myth. And we just posted that video to the front of whatreallyhappened.com. I guess to get to the bottom of this, we're going to have to get Jesse back on the show. We've had him on the show once before. I'm going to try and get him back on the show again here so he can tell us what it is he really stands for and about his run for the White House here. Now then, we're going to go take a few phone calls here. Glenn in Pennsylvania. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
On the economic front, I just wanted to point out, I don't know if you addressed this or not, but while we're all understandably concentrating on Greece, at last close, the Shanghai Composite was down 6.42% on bubble fears. they said. 6.42%.
Their exports are also cratering because China was sending most of those exports to the United States and Europe, and as the U.S. and Europe economies crash, for lack of a better word, we're not buying imported products, and the Shanghai Shipping Index is way, way down. See, that's the problem with globalism. When it goes bad, it's going to go bad everywhere.
Yeah, no firewall. But, I mean, it just shows you how, like, we still have to expect the unexpected. Because just when you're looking over here, something comes from over there.
Well, we got another one brewing out there in California because with the water cutoffs and water shortage, property values are plummeting, and Californians are finding themselves below water on their mortgages, and that could trigger another housing crash. Boy, the people on Wall Street and Brussels and Washington, D.C., they have really messed this place up in their eagerness to help the money junkies feed their addictions. Okay?
Right, yeah, well, at least there's some water in California. It's over the houses.
All right, well, listen, I'm going to let you go here and grab this other phone call here. We're going to switch over to Russell in Australia. Good day, mate. What's going on down there?
Yeah, how you going, mate?
Hi, how you doing? What's on your mind?
Actually, I was bringing in about an article that you posted on your website about the SFRI.
Yes.
Actually, I'm sort of a victim of those horrible things. Because of one of your posts, it linked me to something that I didn't know about. I didn't know there was residual effect. I have not been the same person for about 11 years. And you have these weird, it's like you're awake and asleep at the same time when you're on them. When you go off them, you always dream about who you used to be. And when you wake up, you feel like you're asleep.
Yeah, these medications, they permanently alter the chemistry of your brain. There was one very tragic story we reported about a year ago about a woman in Britain, perfectly healthy, perfectly happy, and the doctor just convinces her to go on this very mild tranquilizer to deal with work stress. She had an adverse reaction. They gave her more medication to deal with that, and they just kept piling on the medication until finally they had to put this woman in a mental institution because she couldn't function any longer.
Funny you say that. My father committed suicide, and I went to the doctor because I wanted something to deal with the grief, and he gave me his Zoloft.
Oh, that's a bad one. That's a bad one.
No, actually, the bad one's Effexor. 10 years later, I was on 250 milligrams a day of that stuff, with olanzapine and Stilnox to help me sleep. It's funny, they just kept giving me drugs to sort of mellow me out. I ended up in prison because I drove to the police station to ask for help with my grandfather, who'd been dead for 12 years. These things, I've started writing because of you, showing you what's wrong. I don't think people know. I mean, these simple depressions that we have, once you have these things, your simple depressions aren't depressions anymore. They're unbelievable. It's really unbelievable. It's nearly 6 o'clock in the morning here, and I'm still awake because I listen to you. Actually, you're pretty much the only foundation I have in my life. I just don't trust anything. I barely ever go outside because what to do outside? I don't know who to trust. It's terrible.
Oh, boy. I mean, I've heard so many stories.
My brain's dead.
I've heard so many stories like this. There's a website called ssristories.org. They changed their extension, ssristories.org.
That's who you linked me to. That's why I'm ringing you.
Okay.
Because you linked me to them, and I was in tears because I couldn't believe that there are so many people that are affected by this stuff, and doctors, they think if it's not working, just up the dose. I didn't even know that Effexor should only be administered a maximum at 100 milligrams. I was at 150 more than that. I mean, my brain shuts down. And you know what's the strangest thing out of all of this? The only thing that makes me even be able to go outside, speak to people, is if I have marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
I never even used to smoke the stuff. In fact, I only just started smoking it about 2 years ago. I never even touched it because everyone told me it was, cause of psychosis and all kinds of stuff.
There has never been a documented case of psychosis arising from the use of marijuana. They just don't want you medicating with something you can grow in your backyard. They want you to go to the pharmacy. We're almost at our commercial break, and before I let you go here, the only thing I can suggest right now is to very slowly start to wean yourself off of some of these medications. In many cases, you can't quit cold turkey. You can go into convulsions with some of these medications, but I think you just need to start backing off on the ones that you can back off and just, really concentrate on a healthy diet, drinking a lot of water, and you're going to go through some real serious emotional roller coaster time, but yeah, you don't want to stay on this stuff anymore. I mean, look how many years of your life you've lost to this.
I've been on your website for about 8 years. I only grow my own food. I'm a chef by trade.
Oh, good for you.
I only grow organic food. I always have. I've started getting into aquaponics, which is fabulous, unbelievably brilliant. I have a heap of chickens. One of my darlings. It's one thing. It's because everyone keeps telling you there's something wrong with you. And the thing was, all I wanted to do was get over the grief of my father. And I feel like I'm still grieving about him, and I shouldn't be.
Yeah, Russell, I am so sorry. I'm going to have to end the phone call because we have to take a break for commercials here. But good luck, and I hope it works out for you. I've heard this similar stories so many more times than I want to hear. Good luck, Russell. We'll be thinking about you. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And with regard to Russell's phone call, I've heard so many stories like it. Tom in our control room says he knows somebody went through the same thing. I've had only one experience with these drugs myself. Many, many years ago, when I was going through the breakup of my first marriage, I went to see my doctor on a completely unrelated matter. And she said, how are you doing with the divorce? And I said, well, I'm not entirely cheerful. She says, well, you need some of this. I don't even remember what it was she prescribed. I wish I could, but I don't. So, being very naive and trusting back then, I took the medication, and I was happy. I was fun to be with for about 4 weeks. The 5th week, I went into an absolute black depression. And the only way I got through it is I just kept saying to myself, it's the chemical, it's the chemical, it's the chemical, it's the chemical, and I have not touched those medications since then, and I never will. There's something that you all need to remember, especially Russell, if you are listening to this show. Still, psychiatry is not an exact science the way geology or chemistry or astronomy is. It's all subjective. There isn't a machine that they can actually put you on that says this person is bipolar or sociopathic or psychotic. It's all people's opinion. And in a lot of ways, it's just like the fashion industry, where the psychiatrist will say, this is the way you should be, and we will sell you a product that will get you there. Remember, the guy who came up with ADHD shortly before he passed away admitted it was a completely fictitious disease made up to sell product. The pharmaceutical industry is in many ways, again, it's operated more like the fashion industry than an actual science. And they cause a lot of damage. And that is why in the United States of America, pharmaceuticals are a $375 billion, with a B, business every single year. That kind of money buys a lot of clout, buys a lot of control and influence over the media and over the government. And, you know, for some reason, this whole thing reminded me of the court of Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia, the one where the Bolsheviks killed him and his family. But before that, there was another scandal involving the mad monk, Rasputin. And we look back at that and say, how could these rulers of a country be that bamboozled by this obvious charlatan and fake? And yet, here today in the 21st century, we're seeing the same thing, where our politicians, who are career politicians and don't really know how the world works, they're not engineers, they're not scientists, and they get bamboozled by Al Gore and his global warming, by the pharmaceutical companies saying vaccines are good health policy and they're only going to kill a few people. Anyway. All right, a couple more stories before we hit the top of the hour, and the lovely Lady Claire. Now, the U.S. Geological Survey has come out with their report confirming that fracking wastewater disposal is triggering earthquakes. They're looking at the increase in seismic activity in all these fracking zones. And they're noticing it is inescapable. There has been a dramatic increase in seismicity over the past 6 years in areas with no prior seismic record. Ohio, Oklahoma. Where it's getting very alarming is how many of these fracking wastewater wells are operating near the New Madrid Fault, which is the location of the biggest earthquake in U.S. history. Everybody thinks quakes are out there in California. No, the New Madrid quake was huge, so powerful it actually reversed the flow of water in the Mississippi River for a while. I don't think we want to be tickling that particular dragon. Now, apparently some emails from U.S. government scientists and officials that were pried loose with the Freedom of Information Act, and they were heavily censored and heavily redacted, but they still reveal that government scientists were concerned that the leakage from Fukushima was going to trigger widespread thyroid cancer rates in the United States of America. This at exactly the same time that Ann Coulter was on TV telling you that a little radiation is actually good for you. They knew it was a problem. They just didn't want to do anything about it. All righty, let's see. Over in Sumatra, the Sinabung volcano is continuing its eruption. They're evacuating people. Pyroclastic flows continue along the southeastern and east-northeastern slopes of the volcano. The whole world seems to be rocking and rolling right now. The Sakurajima volcano in Japan was going, another one northwest of Tokyo, and up in Alaska, their Cleveland volcano is starting to show activity as well. Now, obviously, the one that we're all watching is Sinabung because of its close proximity to the Toba supervolcano, and here's where it gets a little bit dicey. Nobody knows exactly how a supervolcano erupts. They made a lot of movies about it. There was a movie about the Yellowstone supervolcano erupting with dramatic eruptions on small volcanoes and then the whole thing let loose. Maybe that's how it happens. Maybe it's just a single vent that starts erupting and grows and grows and grows and grows. One of the reasons the volcanoes in that part of the world are so chaotic has to do with the evil carbon dioxide that's dissolved in the lava. And when a volcano breaks loose and starts to erupt, it can act like a warm bottle of soft drink when you flip the lid off. That sudden shock of depressurization triggers the carbon dioxide to go back into gas form and sprays your ceiling with diet soda. And the same thing actually happens with certain volcanoes. There are two types of lava named after the Hawaiian words for them. There's the pahoho, which is the very smooth, pillowy, easy-to-walk-on lava, and the a'a, which is thought to have been named by the fact that when you walk across it in bare feet, you go, ah, 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 ah. And that a'a lava is very frothy because as it's erupting, there are gas bubbles forming inside it from trapped gases. And when you have lava that has a lot of CO2, you will get explosive eruptions like Krakatoa or Toba. So we're going to keep an eye on that. Now then, getting on back to the subject of marijuana, as more and more states in the United States start legalizing medical marijuana, other countries want to get in on the action. Israel and Canada want to become suppliers to New York's new medical marijuana system. Oh, no, we're not going to let you grow it here in the U.S. and make money domestically. No, well, Canada wants part of the business. And, you know, what's really amazing is marijuana is illegal in Israel. And yet Israel is a world leader on the research into the medical uses of marijuana. So, now over in California, they're still dealing with the aftermath of this mandatory vaccine legislation. There's an interesting article over in the Sacramento Bee on how drug companies donated millions of dollars in campaign cash to California lawmakers ahead of this debate on mandatory vaccines. And basically there is a clear correlation. Those people in the legislature who are out there saying this has to go, were recipients of this huge amount of funding. And the official story is, oh, no, this is just sound health policy to have vaccines. No, it isn't. The evidence indicates these vaccines are not only dangerous, but in many cases ineffective, in some cases actually spreading the disease. We really have reverted back to the traveling Wild West medicine show mentality of healthcare in this country. So, 400,000 Americans every year die from medical mistakes. Time to ban doctors. Let's see, another story over here. Hospitals are blatantly ripping us off, marking up treatments by 1,000%. Another article we have here about how hospitals will recommend unnecessary surgeries because they can just crank it up. It's all about selling product and services. They're not really concerned with health. If Americans were 100% healthy, the medical industrial complex would crash. They cannot survive and prosper unless you are kept in a permanent state of chronic illness. Story out of Refreshing News. 243 arrested, charged with $712 million in false Medicare billings. The arrested include doctors, nurses, and other licensed professionals. Got to take a break for the news. Back with the Lady Claire after these few words. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. And before I go any further, I want to add a postscript to Russell in Australia because I forgot to mention that you need to coordinate with your doctor about the medication issues that you're dealing with. It's an easy oversight to make because in cases like this, you get this very strong impression that the doctors are part of the problem. So you might want to, get a second opinion. Most doctors will say, get a second opinion, and maybe it's time to start looking for doctors who are a little less into pills and a little more into alternative ways of dealing with this. Alrighty, so for those of you watching on BAM User, the gorgeous creature sitting behind me is the lovely Lady Claire, who joins us every Friday with her unique point of view. And what's the first thing you want to talk about?
Well, I've been noticing the tremendous difference in how the IMF has been treating Greece vis-a-vis the way it's been treating Ukraine. And this is really, it's bad behavior. It's bad behavior.
It's money junkie behavior.
A day after its negotiators stormed out of the Greek negotiations with creditors, Christine Lagarde said that the IMF will continue to lend money to the Ukraine even if Ukraine cannot service its debts.
That's another one of these double standards. where, they're out there, Greece has to pay. Ukraine cannot pay their bills. IMF is going to give them more money to keep on fighting these wars.
Yeah, and the IMF wants to put Ukraine squarely in the European sphere of influence, and wants the breakaway republics, where I think you mentioned that the manufacturing really is, to become neutralized. I'll have more about that a little bit later on in the show. But the next thing I wanted to talk about was, and folks, this was an actual palm-to-forehead moment at Velocity when I read it. Apparently there are icebergs ahead for expensive U.S.-UK aircraft carrier projects. Now, these planes are costing you $17 billion a pop, and it's going to be the latest and greatest, most advanced supercarrier. At least that's what the glossy brochure promises. The first of this ultra-advanced class of ships, the USS Gerald R. Ford, has been delivered to the Navy for testing. However, there's a problem.
Is this the one with the railgun catapults that still won't work?
No.
Oh, okay.
This is something slightly different. The never-before-seen electromagnetic aircraft launch system, EMALS, doesn't appear to be working all that well.
That's what I just said.
Okay,
the railgun catapults aren't working.
And it's supposed to work. And it doesn't. And it's
always supposed to work. What are the F-22, the F-35? Yeah. They're supposed to work. Look at the sales brochure we have here.
And 10 years later, the ship is ready. The electromagnetic catapult isn't. And Mike, to me, this is a snapshot of everything that is wrong with the American defense industry. Because when people need it out in the field, they need it to work. And although Russia and China may be paying less for what they're getting a a lot more bang for their buck in terms of what's working.
They're buying simple, elegant, what actually works. Mm-hmm. The military-industrial complex has for decades operated under what's called a cost-plus contract, where the government will say, we want you to build this, and we will pay whatever you spend to build it plus a little bit more, which is your profit margin. And so the defense contractors are incentivized to just load these things up with all kinds of high-tech, whiz-bang junk because that maximizes their profit. It certainly soaks the American taxpayer.
Oh, yeah.
And you wind up with weapon systems that look really impressive out there on the various air shows and whatnot, but really don't work very well at all. And we've seen that with the F-22, the F-35. Ospreys are still crashing. We had one crash here recently in Hawaii.
And we had some casualties with that, did we not?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, people really got hurt on that one.
Yeah.
And this Gerald R. Ford was supposed to be this new ultra-high-tech aircraft carrier. And, I mean, we're talking basic things like the catapult system isn't working. And if... this is one of the reasons why getting into some kind of a war with Russia or China is really very dangerous, because there are too many people in the Pentagon and Washington, D.C. who are convinced that because we are spending more on our weapons than the other countries, that victory is assured, and that is absolutely not guaranteed, especially if we're wasting all this money on things that don't really work when they actually get out there in the real world.
Yeah, and on another note regarding this subject, apparently robotic warfare is part of the Pentagon strategy to defeat Eurasia. We're talking about China, Iran, Russia. And there was a very interesting speech put forward by Deputy Secretary of Defense Robert Work at the Army War College on April 8th. And it kind of reveals where the Defense Department believes we're going to go. Work's words should be read in full by any strategist trying to understand the imperatives that guide the world's most armed forces. He elaborates on the theoretical foundations of American military might, including how the Pentagon plans to counter the three types of wars supposedly being waged by Iran, Russia, and China. I don't know quite where this gentleman's mind is, but the main strategic innovation being presented is something called the third offset strategy, which in practice amounts to electromagnetic anti-missile railguns and seamless combat integration between man and machine. And I've got a short memo for this guy. Why, Mr. Work, are you not preparing for the possibility of peace? A peace that involves people working in good faith, hard negotiations, and gives people a chance to work together for the common good. Now,
there's an answer for that.
Oh, I know. I'm going to get there.
All right.
But I come from San Francisco, And that's earthquake country. The same is true in China and Iran. And I keep thinking, Michael, what if some of the best minds could come together working on a way to make an affordable building material that doesn't fall apart when there's a quake? And working together means that we may be able to develop a way of predicting earthquakes that becomes more real with technological advances. It's possible. And
anything's possible with enough research, with enough funding, with enough political commitment to make it work. Unfortunately, these days, science is being, for lack of a better word, bastardized in service to political agenda and profit motive.
And what I would like to say to this gentleman, if I could ever speak to him, and I don't think he's planning on coming over for tea, is that there is a horrifically communicable mental illness in D.C., and this mental illness has to do with the making of money through war at all costs, no matter how much the people of the warring countries have to suffer. And I think that's kind of where we are. It's like the song, "Wars never fought for the reasons you're given. Those in power keep feeding you lies. And the reasons you're made to keep fighting and killing should come as no big surprise. It's not about freedom or glory or honor or preserving the American way. It's all about money, control, greed, and power, and making those who resist go away." And I'm afraid that communicable disease ranks very largely in these considerations.
Well, what I was going to say before, the reason why they're always preparing for war is it's part of the business cycle.
Yeah.
Because if you're taking money away from the taxpayer and you're building weapons, you reach a point where finally the taxpayers say, look at how many weapons you've got. Can't we put our money someplace else? Well, okay, let's start a war, use up all the weapons that we have, and then we have to start building all over again. And that's just part of the cycle, and Eisenhower warned us about it.
Yeah.
The military-industrial complex needs wars to grind up the work product in order to justify taxing you to build more and newer weapons, even if they're junk.
Like creative destruction from the film The Fifth Element.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The broken window analogy.
Yes.
Okay, well, we're coming up on a commercial break, and we'll be right back with Claire's next story, okay, after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And, Claire, your next story is?
Apparently, Kiev's junta forces are terror-bombing Donbass. They're using banned chemical weapons, cluster bombs, white phosphorus in Donbass, including against civilian neighborhoods. Now, this comes to us from a gentleman who's one of my heroes of the pro-peace movement, Stephen Lendman. And Stephen is pretty good about getting stuff right. Reports are indicating that U.S. experts are helping Ukraine produce chemical weapons for use against rebel forces. Donetsk People's Republic intelligence learned that they are being quietly developed for an escalated dirty war. On Tuesday, there was a report of a fuel-air thermobaric explosives, which targeted a Donetsk chemical plant fired from junta-held Korohovo, about 30 clicks away. These weapons suck oxygen from open areas and human lungs. They generate intense, high-temperature explosions. They're much more destructive than conventional explosions of equal weight, particularly when used against people in bunkers, shelters, caves, and other enclosed places.
These are actually the most powerful non-nuclear weapons that the U.S. uses.
Yeah.
These fuel-air bombs.
Now, if Stephen, and I think he is right, where is the outrage? Ladies and gentlemen, with so many problems here at home and humanity appearing on the brink of a world war, courtesy of the money junkies, that the guys in D.C. are spending a dime of U.S. taxpayer money on creating something which, when used, is a war crime, while the infrastructure in this country is just rotting away, I get very angry. And, you know, Mike, there's a biblical phrase, and I'm paraphrasing it, as ye sow, that shall ye also reap. Well, the U.S. government is sowing a heck of a lot of destruction in this world, and somehow, in some way, it's going to come back to haunt them.
Well, you know, the use of these banned weapons may be another attempt to goad Russia into some kind of an overt action to protect Ukrainian lives that the U.S. can then seize on to say, Russia's invading.
Yeah.
And obviously, the people using these weapons don't want it to be known that they're using the weapon. Well, let me rephrase that. They want Russia to know that we're using those weapons, but not the people of the United States of America or Europe, so that they can go on playing, we're the innocent party. Russia just came in for no reason at all and did whatever.
Yeah, I think so too. But it is very unsettling to me that the U.S. is enabling the Ukraine against the breakaway republics, rather than trying to stimulate some sort of dialogue that is going to ratchet the tensions down. But that's not what they want.
No, what they want is all of the Ukraine brought into the European Union. And basically, I mean, look at the map. What's been going on for decades is NATO and the United States and the European Union grabbing more and more countries, bringing them into the slavery of the ECB, and all the while screaming, Russia's the aggressor, Russia's the aggressor. Basically, Russia was everybody's friend up until the day Putin took government control of their central bank. And that's when he got put on the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list.
Yeah. I'd like to move over to the Middle East, and there are two topics.
I wouldn't. I'm perfectly happy here in Hawaii.
Well, that was a metaphor.
I'm sorry. I misunderstood.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
Apparently, the Yemen peace talks in Geneva have collapsed. And there's no proposal, there's no talking, and...
well, again, nobody wants peace there. What the U.S. wants is to send a message to all of the nations of the world that when we conquer you and put in a puppet government, you learn to like it or bad things will happen to you. That's what's going on in Yemen.
This is a genocidal collective punishment of the Yemenite people for wanting to kick out an oppressive U.S.-backed dictator. And guys, what's going on with Saudi Arabia in Yemen is a war crime. Please let's remember that. And the other issue regarding Yemen.
All war is a crime.
Yeah. Thousands of people have been diagnosed with dengue fever in southern Yemen. And the World Health Organization said last week that at least 3,000 suspected cases have been reported since March, with 3 people dying from the disease. And, when kids get it, it's devastating. Now, what there needs to have happen is an immediate ceasefire so that these innocents can be treated. But, with the breakdown of talks, I'm thinking that Saudi Arabia is going to amp up its military game and continue. It is not distinguished between civilian populations and military. And it's just going to go on killing.
Well, they're not going to let anybody in there to deal with the dengue fever because that's part of the war strategy.
Yeah.
Because dengue fever is one of the many pathogens that has been weaponized by the United States government. Yeah. In fact, Cuba blamed the U.S. for the 1981 outbreak of dengue fever down there. So, again, this sudden emergence of dengue fever across a wide area of Yemen, it could very easily be biological warfare. I wouldn't rule it out.
No, I probably wouldn't either, but it's...
Oh, Pakistan is also claiming the CIA used dengue fever as a bioweapon. Boy, there's I'm going down the list from the Google search. Apparently it's a favorite tool of choice of U.S. imperialism.
Yeah, I get very angry when I hear about innocent people getting deliberately hurt. It just...
Well, it's more than deliberately hurt or deliberately killed. They're deliberately inflicting serious, lingering illness and pain on them.
Yeah, I agree.
And I'm beginning to think that the typhus outbreaks that swept Germany in the closing months of World War II were also biological warfare because the Soviet Union had weaponized typhus decades before the war began. And the typhus didn't hit Germany until Germany had encountered the Soviets over there at the Eastern Front.
Yes, yeah, it's this kind of warfare is definitely not new.
No, it's even in the Bible. It's even in the Bible when the Israelites smote their enemy and God gave them illnesses, bubonic plague, in fact.
Yeah, definitely. The next thing I'd like to tease with, because I know that we're almost at a commercial break. Israel is furious that the UN report on Israel mentions Israel so much.
Well, duh.
And there was a report on the treatment of Palestinian children in the occupied territories. And Ron Prosser, who was the ambassador, complained that it mentioned Israel together all too much. And it's a second report that the UN has issued, and the first one didn't mention anything about the large death toll of Palestinian children. And it's amazing. The Israeli government will take absolutely no responsibility for its serial genocide of the Palestinian people and Palestinian kids.
Here's the absurd part of it.
Yeah.
Israel goes in and just flattens Gaza and then says, in the interest of fairness, the United Nations should mention Israel and Hamas exactly the same number of times. It's a quota-based war crimes accusation system. It's ridiculous. We've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And your next comment is?
Well, apparently Moscow is furious after both Belgium and France freeze Russian state assets.
As punishment for Russian aggression, registered trademark White House.
Oh, yeah. The Hague is not Putin's favorite place today. Following the war crime comments earlier, the arbitrations court's decision to rule in favor of Yukos shareholders and thus against the allegedly politically motivated confiscation of the firm's assets by the Russian government, with a $50 billion settlement, half of what was sought, has prompted a quick and angry response from the Russian government, blasting the one-sided use of evidence and reiterating the massive tax evasion that the leadership was involved in. Russia slams the puzzling, unprecedented amount of damages awarded, claiming the process is becoming increasingly politicized.
It's just another way of trying to provoke Russia into doing something that can be seized on as the excuse to launch the war. And we're almost seeing a repeat of 1941, because most people don't know this. But first of all, Pearl Harbor was not a surprise. And in point of fact, Franklin Roosevelt spent all of 1941 intentionally provoking the Japanese following an 8-step plan crafted by Office of Naval Intelligence Lieutenant Commander Arthur H. McCollum, who simply wrote out, if you do these 8 things, Japan will be provoked to attack us. Mm-hmm. And Roosevelt followed all 8 of those steps, and then when Japan attacked, oh, it's a surprise sneak attack, those dastardly slanty-eyed, whatever, and we were off to war. And that's what's going on here. They're trying to provoke Russia into doing some kind of an overt action that can be seized on as saying, oh, look, Russia has attacked us, we must go to war, hopefully before the economy implodes. We are literally in a race between the implosion of the global private central bank network and the start of a real, honest-to-goodness shooting world war, which all these governments want as a distraction, so that you're not going to blame them for all the damage and destruction, because that's what they did the last 2 times. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008. Here we are on the brink of Armageddon.
Yeah, it appears that Belgium and France are playing economic picadors with these moves. And if you've ever seen a bullfight or you know a little bit about it, the picadors aggravate the bull in advance of the large move by the matador.
That's a very good analogy. The picador's job is to get the bull angry enough to charge the matador, and that's exactly what is going on right now with Russia as the bull, NATO and the U.S. as the matador, and all of these other countries going in there to just barb and jab and try and get this thing going.
Michael, would you speculate for us what you think Russia's response is going to be? What are they going to see as a measured response?
Well, Lavrov's already told the world what's going to happen. Russia's going to start seizing foreign assets within their borders, matching tit for tat, as it were. But again, this will be seized on by the West to say, oh, Russia's, unrealistic. They're just stealing other people's money. But of course, when France and Belgium are stealing Russia's assets, they've got a big legal justification for it. And we're seeing these double standards in the propaganda all the time here. But I think Russia is going to continue to play things very cool. I think Putin is going to continue to basically take the high road, because Putin knows that really, ultimately, all he's got to do is wait and not give the U.S. government and NATO a reason to start a shooting world war. And the Western banking system and these Western governments are going to implode. They're destroying themselves. And all Putin has to do is wait. And
do you think that NATO and the U.S. are planning some kind of false flag if they can't get Putin to respond militarily?
At this point, it is a certainty that some parties within the U.S. NATO and Israel are at least considering a false flag as an option to get things going. They're in a corner in a very real way with all of this stuff. And I think the reason that we haven't seen a major false flag since the Boston bombing is the awareness that the public has grown very skeptical and wary of the official story about anything. I mean, the suspicions that this church shooting in Charleston was another staged event are all over the independent media right now. And that makes a new false flag very, very risky. But if they get desperate enough, desperate people will take desperate chances. We do know that Israel has been building and test detonating radioactive dirty bombs in the Negev desert for the last few months, which suggests the possibility that they're going to set one off in the U.S. and say, oh, this is Iranian terrorism, this is why we can't let them, and basically try and get all the Christians to kill all the Muslims.
But the Negev is where the Bedouins are, is it not? Or at least were.
Well, they are, but, it's not like Israel really cares about the Bedouins. I mean, there have been serious radioactive leaks out of that facility in Dimona for years. And Israel still will not allow inspectors or even repair people in there because they think the bomb factory in the basement is still a secret.
How can they possibly think that at this point in the 21st century?
Well, there's a line between officialdom and the real world. And in the world of officialdom, Israel is still practicing nuclear ambiguity. The U.S. government officially is going along with this idea that we don't know for a fact that Israel has nuclear weapons. But officialdom and the real world are becoming so disconnected that ordinary people are beginning to realize it's the emperor's new clothes all over again. Officially the emperor is wearing fabulous clothes. No, he's naked.
But wasn't there a declassified report that came out that, from the U.S. that stated very clearly that Israel was a nuclear state?
That was a declassified report, but again, that was not supposed to be part of the official public posture. But all of these reports are coming out. We found all these documents from the former government of South Africa that Israel was trying to sell them a clandestine nuclear weapon, and if Israel was selling them a clandestine nuclear weapon, Israel probably sold a few others around the world, which is the very activity the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is supposed to prevent.
And which Israel will not sign.
Okay, we're going to grab a real quick phone call here before the commercial break. Steve in Florida, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Howdy, Mike and Claire.
Hello.
Hey, Mike, I called Monday, I think, and you didn't let me finish the second half of my question.
Okay, real quick, we got a commercial break coming.
Okay. I was calling about how Mexicans can re-enter the country with nothing but a voter's registration card. No picture, nothing. Number, nothing. Okay. So, now I think Hillbilly is, and we know who I'm talking about, is playing a trick on the Mexican illegals. Whereas, if you vote in the United States, North America here, then that gives you citizenship. Boom. Just like that, because they use that voter's registration card like a Social Security card.
Well, it is illegal for non-citizens to vote in American elections, and, of course, that's why they're fighting any kind of voter ID laws tooth and nail, because Hillary is counting on the illegal vote to help put her over the top next year.
Right. So I just wanted to point that out, is that, in their minds, they don't understand the system, but that's going to give them citizenship just by voting, so they think.
Well, if they're dumb enough to believe that, the big problem.
No, they're not stupid. They just don't know how. I mean, how much do you know about Mexican?
Let me finish my thought, because we're almost at the end of the break here. From a purely practical point of view, once they're in this country, whether they're legal citizens or not, it's going to be very difficult to get them back out again. And so whether they're really legally citizens or not is almost irrelevant to the fact that they are here. They're a burden on our economy. They're a burden on California's water. They're carrying communicable diseases, and it's just a total disaster. Steve, I got to let you go. We got to take another break for commercials. Bye-bye. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, last segment of our Pauhana Friday program. And before we go back to Claire here, we're getting reports that apparently today in Greece, it's obviously nighttime there, the banks are closed, but apparently during the day, some savings account holders were not able to get their money out of the Greek banks. So it looks like this is really going to start unraveling for real next week. So take the appropriate precautions. You should have no more money in your bank than you need to cover your immediate obligations, because if it's in the bank, if it's in their computers, they can and will grab it, because the laws have been changed to let them drop their losses onto you.
Right. And what is that term for it? Unsecured investors.
Yeah, last November, the Congress changed the definition of a savings account holder here in the United States of America to be an unsecured investor in the bank, meaning that when the bank is losing money, you, as an unsecured investor, are expected to share in the losses. And a lot of people, I tell this to, and they say, nah, couldn't be. Banks are safe. We've been told banks are safe all of our lives. My money is in the safe. We've got the FDIC protecting us and everything. No, you don't. You don't. Not anymore. The laws goeth before conscripted income. And the last official act of any government in history is to loot the nation. That's where we are right now. Yeah. What is your next story?
The next story is that apparently the Pentagon is quietly working to set up an elaborate network of defenses to protect American cities from a barrage of Russian cruise missiles. And the plan calls for buying radars, which would enable National Guard F-16 fighter jets to spot and shoot down fast and low-flying missiles. Top generals want to network those radars with sensor-laden aerostat balloons hovering over American cities and with coastal warships equipped with sensors and interceptor missiles of their own. And apparently this is being put on a fast track, away and ahead of the normal purchasing procedure by the military.
Boy, I sure hope it works better than the one they were testing off of Long Island when TWA 800 went down. And it's going to be another costly boondoggle. Part of the problem being that by now, I'm sure, I don't know this for a fact, but if I were Russia, I would be making stealth cruise missiles that can't be seen on radar. And we know that Russia is a master of electronic warfare. Look what they did to the USS Donald Cook in the Black Sea.
Yes.
So if Russia were going to attack the U.S. with cruise missiles, and I don't think they're going to do it, it's just another excuse to have a big, juicy contract handed to a defense contractor. I'm sure that Russia would accompany those cruise missiles with jamming equipment to get through, because all of these weapons are set up with the idea we're going to be attacked with just one weapon system. Here is how we will defend against it. But in the real world, attacks are done with coordinated assets working together. When you forget that is when you get in trouble. That's why that stealth fighter got shot down in Kosovo. They just sent it in alone and said it's invulnerable, it's invisible, and it will do the job all by itself. And they didn't send it in with jammer aircraft and other countermeasures, and sure enough, they got eyes on the target and they shot that thing down.
Yeah. You know, I look around both locally and at the mainland, and I realize painfully clearly that we the people are getting looted to make more bombs, weapons, and planes, which is not really going to make this country any more safe in any tangible way. And to me,
it's also not going to make us prosperous, because we're going to lose this one.
Yeah. The only things that are going to create true safety for Americans are hard, good faith negotiations with countries this government doesn't really like to create win-win situations and have the U.S. not mucking about in other people's countries to attain resources that we have no moral right to.
See, the U.S. government doesn't want a win-win situation. They want everybody else to do what they're told. The big issue that the United States has with Russia and China right now is that Russia and China will not run their countries for the benefit of American financial interests. They're getting uppity. They're too big for their britches. Don't they understand that the United States rules the planet? And more people are saying, actually, no, we don't like the way the United States is ruling the planet. And they're already losing this. The war to drag us all back to Bretton Woods, that's failing. They're losing ground on the number of nations that are willing to use the U.S. dollar anymore. And because we have a government that is institutionally incapable of admitting they've made a mistake and changing course, we are on a path to complete and absolute ruin.
And as you and I have discussed, Mike, I can see only two potential outcomes from all of this. One is a complete financial breakdown in this country, or a world war. And I wish I could find a middle ground somewhere that isn't that draconian. But I've looked and I've thought it out, And
unfortunately, we may wind up with both because the economy is starting to unravel for real, and they may get into the war just so we're distracted from it. That all the hardship and hunger and starvation, everything, it's not because of the economy, it's because of gosh darn Russians and those gosh darn Chinese, and we could actually get both together. And because the bozos in Wall Street and Washington D.C. can't think of anything else to do.
Yes, I loved your comment about the bunkers and what we need to do with them.
After the collapse and the rich people go into their bunkers, let's just cement them over. The underground emergency command post the government's going to hide out in, let's just find the opening and cement it over, and that will be the end of that.
But I hope if and when we get on the other side of what we're facing, and it's from a geopolitical and economic standpoint, it's pretty rough. Some of you know, I do marketing for a living. It's my day job. And I will tell you, as I've shared with Michael, I'm not bad at getting return phone calls, but the phone hasn't been ringing with companies, particularly in California.
And we saw the same thing. As you know, to try and deal with medical bills and other costs, I've gone back into the computer animation business, focusing on industrial videos. And we've got a lot of people saying, wow, you do good work. We would like to use you. But they don't have the cash. They're waiting for somebody else to pay an overdue invoice, and that person is waiting for somebody to pay an invoice. So much money has been sucked out of the society as a whole and piled up on the top of Wall Street. It's locking up. There isn't enough currency for the economy to actually function, and it's another example of the extreme short-sightedness of the federal government's economic planners.
It looks to me like the U.S. government likes to hire people who have no ability to think something through to its logical conclusion.
Well, they don't want any of the underlings, anybody on the staff showing them up here. They hire dullards to make themselves look good. But the reality is, when this nation was started, the government, which was a part-time job, was made up of people who knew how to actually get things done. Publishing, insurance, crafts, printing, everything. They were first and foremost industrialists and professionals, and being in the government was kind of part-time. Today, we are the inheritors of a virtually multi-generational political ruling class that doesn't know how to do anything other than make good speeches and shake hands and, set up rules and then sell exceptions to the rules to the highest bidder.
Yeah, it's winning a seat in Congress is sort of like winning the lottery these days, because you can count on corporations sponsoring you to promote their agendas rather than the agendas of we the people.
Congress has become a one-stop shopping center for all the corrupting influences in the country because they know they can go on up there with a pile of cash and get laws forbidding GMO labeling, getting laws mandating vaccination. They can get the EPA to say fracking is safe. They can get the FDA to say screaming hot flaming Cheetos are safe, but natural grain bars are bad nutrition and you shouldn't be selling them. It really is about as purely fascistic as you can get. And it has reached an extreme peak. And I'm afraid our best course of action, unfortunately, is going to be sit back and just wait it out because it is tearing itself apart. Fascist governments have very short shelf lives, historically speaking.
Just get the popcorn and sit back and watch. And please don't. I know a lot of us are very angry. Please try not to do something with that anger that will be interpreted by the federal government as wanting to come out and put that anger down with extreme prejudice, because that is what will happen.
The last thing we can do is give the government an excuse to declare martial law and a dictatorship. I am absolutely in agreement with everybody who says that this Charleston thing was trying to kick up race riots, and that will work against both the blacks and the white people. So far, we're seeing tremendous calm in the American people because they know this is what the government wants. There's the music. Time for us to get on out of here. Have a really good weekend. We will be back Monday here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices. Tell all your friends everything that you hear on the show. Call your local talk radio stations. Ask them to program GCN. Direct them to GCNlive.com. We'll be back Monday. Aloha, America.